And that's a cheat here. Yes. Let's try that. Okay, we'll get started. Thank you everyone for coming out today. I know it's busy, and I appreciate you coming here. You've all got a chance to take a look at the agenda, and we're in for a good day. Thank you to Penn State, John and Steve, for helping us out today in the Curley Center. We're looking forward to it. We're looking forward to interacting with the students, and hopefully they'll be able to get something out of today's sessions as well. We'll learn from them, they'll learn from us. This is the first session. It's on small newspapers and winning practices. And sitting up here with me today, we have three people who've figured out how to do it and do it right, and they're going to share their ideas and how they do it with you today. Ben Burgandy from Williamsport Sun-Gazette, Jim Reeser from the Citizens Voice in Wilkes-Barre, and Kyle Newman, who is the Curley Center's Award for Excellence in Youth coverage this year. He operates a website in North Indiana, and we're going to get through this and talk to you about what each guy is doing to make it worthwhile. Now today, if you're going to be on Twitter, follow us at APSE_sportmedia. We're going to be tweeting from throughout the day today. It's being live streamed at www.ustream.tv/channel/Curley Center. So,
Can you give that again?
yeah, sure. ustream.tv/channel/Curley Center. Sure. Okay. So one of the things we want to talk about with small newspapers is finding time to stay organized and do everything that you need to do, because when you're in a small shop, as everyone knows, you pretty much do everything. So let's get started, and let me ask Jim, because we had this conversation a few weeks ago on the telephone. How are you able to maximize your downtime? What's the best practices you've found for staying organized?
I think for us, the key has just been, when you get downtime like this time of year when there's rainouts, is to start planning and thinking ahead down the road. For example, we do a high school football section every week called Game Face. We started planning that already for the upcoming season, and it's one of those things where you just kind of get some ideas. You sit around, you talk a little bit about it, and then last Tuesday or Wednesday we had a rain out, and next thing you know, we had a concrete idea for our special project that we're going to do for the section this year, and we kind of really put into play a lot of different things we're going to do for it. So that's one of the keys for us, is just always staying ahead and looking at the schedule and saying, okay, football season is going to be here before you know it. What can we do now to kind of get ourselves ahead of the curve and get prepared for it?
Ben, how about in Williamsport? You guys have a lot of time to prepare for things like the Little League World Series, but just like anything else, the day-to-day operations, how do you manage to do that?
A lot of that is knowing the calendar in advance. One of the first sessions I ever went to at APSE was run by Emilio Garcia Ruiz in the Washington Post. He said, well, if you know your whole year in advance, that's how you can plan. He says for the Washington Post, we know when the Super Bowl, the World Series are, we know when all that stuff's happening. Plan to do a lot of stuff around that. And so if you look at our calendar for the year, yes, Little League World Series, you want to have a lot of good things ready to go then, but late August, early September is not the best brainstorming, thinking time. It's a lot more action time. So if you look ahead at the full year's calendar for 2015, we know going into 2015 that January for us is going to be a lot of high school and college regular season winter sports. February is going to be a lot of high school postseason sports. March is going to be the college postseason sports, which will invariably wind down into the spring, which is a bit of a dead time. So March, April, May, for all we're doing is high school sports, where it's rain today, sun tomorrow. Who knows what's going on the next day? This is a good time to be working ahead. For us, June, July, and early August are a lot of vacation times. And in the fall, it's football season. You're not going to be brainstorming as much during football weekends. That's a little bit more of a doing time. But Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you can make a lot of good planning in there. So if you look ahead at the calendar and you spot where your opportunities are going to be, you can work ahead. And one of the things we started doing in working ahead was when we jumped our football tab about 4 years ago. Instead of putting the football tab together at the same time during the Little League World Series, which the guys who worked for us will tell you is not fun, we started doing a football magazine where right now we're actually compiling feature stories that are frankly as good now as they would be as if they were in August. You can write really just about any issue to write about high school sports, whether it's, uniforms, concussions, booster clubs, whatever. You can talk to those people just as easily now when nothing's going on, stick it in the can, maybe refresh it when it's time to run it. You can do that now, it's good to go, and you saved yourself a lot of work and a lot of headache when times are busy.
So Kyle, let's talk a little bit about the Fan Varsity Sports Network. I guess you can commiserate a little bit with the small newspapers being in the position of having to juggle a lot of tasks at one time and get things done. Educate us a little bit on what you do with your product and how things work for you.
Okay, so the fanvsn.com is a hyper-local high school sports website. Our coverage area is about 50 schools in northern Indiana. And the site, digital only, it's really feature-driven, multimedia-driven. And kind of like these two guys were talking about, I sit down, kind of plan my week a couple weeks in advance, especially in northern Indiana during the winter. This winter was not as bad, but last winter, like 20-some days of school got canceled, so tons of canceled games, tons of makeups and everything. So I find it's good to kind of have a couple features in my pocket. I'm a one-man band at my website, so I got to make sure that when games get canceled, like they have this winter, I got a couple things lined up. The summer is also a great time for me to really pursue enterprise journalism, long reads, that kind of more in-depth stuff. And then really in terms of the day-to-day coverage, I mean, I'm just a one guy on this website, so it's more featured, not so much game recaps and everything, but features is really what the site thrives off of.
One thing I noticed that you had mentioned on something in an email you shared with me was that you treat the high school athletes like they're pro athletes.
Yeah.
Kids like to see themselves get covered. And I know that Jim and Ben do the same thing at their papers. They'll operate on the small scale the same way the large newspapers cover the pro teams and the big-time college teams. You find that as an opportunity that's very easy to cash in on with the kids.
Yeah, because I mean, most of these kids are used to the bigger papers around northern Indiana, for example, the South Bend Tribune, really cutting back their high school sports coverage, devoting more to Notre Dame and the pro teams around there. So they're used to the paragraph write-up at the very end of the sports section. So when I'm doing these full features on them, and it's really multimedia driven, the photos popping out, the videos, they've really responded to it. I mean, the communities have, the kids have, and I'm finding that they're excited now that the brand is kind of established in northern Indiana. When I approach a team or an athlete about doing a feature, they're really excited because they know what that means, that they're kind of, I'm going to blow them up on Twitter, up on Facebook, and really kind of bring them to life. We got a couple different bells and whistles on our site. We got parallax scrolling to kind of bring them to life. We got user customization, so you go to the site, the user can choose their favorite school, and it will customize the colors as well as the news feed according to their favorite school or conference. So just trying to do those things that they're definitely not used to with a lot of the cutbacks at the bigger papers.
Talking about cutbacks a little bit, a lot of newspapers are cutting back areas of content, especially the wires. And Jim, we were discussing this last week on how we're gradually using less and less of wires at smaller newspapers. Why don't you tell us about the process that you guys go through? Because I know that you're a shrinking news hole, has forced you into a situation where you have a huge amount of local content that needs to get in the paper. How do you make the tough decisions, and do you have a guideline that you follow when it comes to what goes first, what goes second?
Yeah, I think for us, it's become local. You know, 9 times out of 10, we're going to lead with a local story. You know, I see like our Sunday section, we're down to like 12 pages, and you know, 2 of those pages are the obituaries at the back of the section. And then I also have an outdoors page. I usually have like a Penguins Weekly page or a Rail Riders page or something like that to get in there. So I find that the space is just less and less every week. So I say, okay, we need to lead with the local. That's what, you know, people are buying our newspaper for. You know, I do get some complaints about there's not enough NBA or NHL, and you know, my thinking now is so much of that, the scores and box scores are available online. I prefer to run a feature or something like that, or you know, give the readers something great about a local athlete that they're not getting on TV or anywhere else. If we give them that feature, it just makes it, I think, better. And that's why we really have pushed that local more recently. I mean, there's times where you go with like a Masters, obviously, things like that. But that local story, and then also when we have a big national story, you know, case in point was when Dean Smith died. A lot of newspapers ran Dean Smith's obituary. We chose not to because we actually found 2 local stories about Dean Smith. One of his players was from the Wilkes-Barre area, so we talked to him about playing for Dean Smith. And we also uncovered a story about, in 1976, Dean Smith brought the Olympic team to King's College to play an exhibition game. And we talked to some people that were involved. And so we took a national story and localized it, and ESPN gave everybody the highlights about Dean Smith's career, but we gave our readers something that no one else could provide that day, and that was Dean Smith and his, you know, impact on the Wyoming Valley and Luzerne County.
How do you find that?
It's, you know, it's having good people on staff. You know, I think that's the one thing, and I think, you know, we have that institutional knowledge with some of our staffers that help. And it's also just when you're, you know, talking to people and you know, you develop sources, you know, it's remembering things, and you know, they might say something to you once about, oh yeah, I remember, you know, Dean Smith playing there, I saw him as a kid. Now, at the time you talk to that person, it may not mean anything, but you can always kind of dial back that and say, hey, you know what, the coach, I remember him saying that, you know, he saw Dean Smith when he was a little kid, I'm going to give him a call and you know, get his thoughts on watching Dean Smith and the Olympic team play basketball.
I used to work with someone who would roll his eyes every time the editor would want to localize a national story or a broader story. And you talked about being sourced in the community. Is it also about being enthusiastic for the reporters, and as an editor, finding a way to make sure that they stay enthusiastic about this stuff?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the one thing we try to do is I try to put my people in position to cover things they like. They have their beats, but you know, one of our staffers, Jonathan, is an avid MMA guy. We have some local MMA ties, so he likes to write those kind of stories. We had a gentleman who was an avid runner, and I took advantage of that interest for him to do some great triathlon coverage and some great running coverage. And you know, it was in addition to his regular duties, but he enjoyed that kind of stuff. And I think if you can put people in a position to write about something they enjoy, in addition to maybe a sport they're not familiar with, you're going to create a better sports section that way.
Keeping your writers interested is almost as important as keeping your readership interested.
And I think as editors, we need to be enthusiastic too. I mean, we can't roll our eyes when Dean Smith dies and says, oh, we need to come up with a local story. You know, I need to call my reporter and say, you know what, Dean Smith died, what can we do to localize this? This is a big deal. Wasn't there some ties here? Or we need to get a hold of this player because he played for Dean Smith.
Does anyone have any similar situations or any questions so far on how we're going here?
To you two especially, Ben and Jim, when you go to more local coverage and you start making decisions what national things not to run, like you talk about NBA, NHL, this kind of stuff, it kind of has to be filtered out. You'd rather get something that is unique, that only you can provide. What's been the reader reaction to that? Has it been, like, I don't know, a little bit of pushback and then this kind of goes away, or is it just, you don't see a lot of pushback for that?
Most of the time, our readers are pretty appreciative of pretty much anything locally that we give them. You know, one of the problems we have with national stuff is we don't really have a city to identify with. Philadelphia is probably the closest pro sports city that Williamsport would identify with, but the Yankees and the Steelers are at least as popular as the Phillies and Eagles. So on a given day, a lot of our like wire stuff is frankly, I'm trying to get those teams in rather than worrying about something that, you know, happened down in Dallas or Los Angeles or something like that. That tends to play into our thinking a little bit, but usually the readers are happy when we give them something different. We were talking a couple weeks ago when we were planning this session. I actually kind of veer a little bit more toward an old school approach toward the newspaper part of it, in that I do try to remember at the end of every day, we are the only daily print media that people are reading and consuming. So if they want to, you know, experience the Masters in the print media and they live in Williamsport, that's probably going to be happening in the Sun-Gazette last weekend. It's really not much more than, you know, a picture of Jordan Spieth and 20 inches of Doug Ferguson, but that's what we're giving them, and I do try to remember that. As far as a lot of the other national stuff, we're pretty sacrosanct on preserving our scoreboard page where we have all of the box scores from the night before. And sometimes the Midwestern and non-regional games will take a hit for space if need be. But you know, we've always had this talk over the years of like, well, papers get rid of all the agate and all the stock listings, they get everywhere else. Well, yeah, stock listings are one thing because the stock price that went in the paper this morning is already outdated by 10 o'clock. The Yankee box score from yesterday, whatever A-Rod did yesterday, that's still the most recent thing he did. That, you know, his news isn't going to change until the next time they play, so that's still at least somewhat fresh. Roundups have taken a hit. You know, I always say, you know, if you could give me about, you know, a column and a half or 2 columns for Major League, NBA, NHL, wrap it all in, we're probably about good to go. And the only other thing I really do is I kind of skew away a little bit from top news where I think people have heard it before. Aaron Hernandez may be a little bit different of a deal, but a lot of like the, you know, maybe the, if you look at the AP Sports Digest on the top 2 or 3 news stories probably aren't much more than a lead brief for us. And I'm likely to fish for a good read from like somebody like Eddie Pells or Paul Newberry that might be harder for the reader to go find on ESPN or their social media feeds or something like that. And just one way I try to be a little bit different when I can.
Kyle, is your competition newspapers?
Yeah, but I'd also say that they help us too. I mean, the company that runs the Fan VSN is Federated Media. They own 16 radio stations, so they're predominantly a radio station company, but they also own the Elkhart Truth, which does a great job with local coverage, with local colleges and high schools. But I would say, for the most part, what I'm doing in terms of the multimedia and stuff, most of the newspapers around Northern Indiana aren't doing that. So like I said before, it's something new and fresh that the communities are embracing for sure. And it all just goes back, in my opinion, to original content. I mean, that's the king. You can go on Twitter and find out about Aaron Hernandez and read all the tweets, read the Boston Globe and everything, but you can't go on and read about Jimtown High School baseball team in Elkhart, Indiana, you know, and so that original content, that's what's really enabled the Fan VSN to go from basically a nothing startup to really a bona fide source of storytelling in about 18 months. I mean, when I first started out going out to the schools, you know, homemade press pass and all, I get a lot of questions like, oh, are you a student here? Or, you know, they weren't really sure what the deal was. But now that the brand is kind of established, you know, it's easier. And the newspapers, I think, they're both maybe adversaries, but also they help me out, like the Elkhart Truth, which is in the same company too. So,
Jim, how would you find that to be a challenge, to be able to compete for eyes with a website similar to that if it were in your market? You know, he's able to take something and not have to have the quick turnaround. Kyle's able to invest some time and do things what we like to call the right way. whereas sometimes you may just be doing everything you can to, keep your hat on your neck for the day.
Yeah, it would definitely be a challenge, and we kind of experience that a little bit right now. Wilkes-Barre is a two-market town, the smallest in the country that has two newspapers competing against each other, and the Times Leader is putting more of their content online now, more of their stories are being posted throughout the day and evening. So for us, we might be working on a story, and we now have to think about, okay, should we break this story? Should we put it on the website too? Or is this an exclusive? We don't want to give it to them, that type of thing. I'm looking at their website to see if they have the story, and so we're kind of seeing a little bit of that now with our direct competitors, is with how they're handling their production.
Well, and building off that, Jim, I mean, since the beginning, I've kind of conceded the breaking news, especially the scores and whatnot. The local newspapers beat me on that most of the time. What I try and focus on is finding those stories, those features that are there, but they don't maybe necessarily have time to cover because they got to do the gamers, they got to get the scores out. I mean, they got a lot of stuff that I don't have to do, I guess. I mean, I still try and do scores and breaking news, but a lot of that goes through the Twitter feed. Twitter is like the driving force behind the website, and that's where a large part of our traffic comes from.
From Twitter?
Straight from Twitter, yeah.
Interesting, because we've been talking for years now, the importance of Twitter, Facebook, social media, things like that. How much, Jim and Ben, do each of you guys push your product on social media platforms?
The product we don't push as much because we are paywall, and part of it's just, talking to people here at these meetings over the years, and part of it is just the way I think it is. Readers don't want to be slammed into a paywall. As good as the story is, we're better off just trying to, it sounds simple and kind of utopian, but have conversations with the readers. And a lot of what we do put out are scoring updates and things like that, which that's out there already. We've got one of our writers, he'll tweet 20, 30 times from a game as long as his phone battery doesn't die. And every night he'll tweet out a lot of the highlights from, 30 games on the schedule, with 27 of them that we don't cover. He'll tweet out a couple of highlights from each of those games and get called in. He does really well with followers and retweets and that sort of thing. The other guys started picking that up after, saw how well that was working. One of the issues I generally think we're going to all have going forward here, we talked about this coming up, is more and more high schools are going to these automated scoring systems. Some of them, like the iPhone one, which is fine, but we've had a lot of coaches start now using the Game Changer app, which Little League World Series went to that a couple of years ago, and from a user standpoint, I found it horribly clunky, and I still do. But Little League, that's the way they did it. They arranged for the media to view it, and that was the official way of looking at stats. We've had some high schools do it, but the problem is the way as far as I can tell, Game Changer's business model is these coaches and teams provide the content through their ease of scoring system, and then they make their money through people that want to pay to experience the game through the app. Well, we're newspapers, we're not in the business of paying for information, so I told a coach the other day who asked real friendly about it, I said, please just keep calling and emailing as it is. We're not going to go down that road. I said, we're not going to pay for it. I would certainly not expect a high school to think that they should feel like they should have to pay to put us on their friends list or whatever. But, to a larger point, I could see somewhere down the line, 5, 10 years, whatever, maybe sooner, somebody's probably already dreaming it up right now where, you can go onto our app for and you can see all 10, 15 games going on at the same time and track it in real time from high school sites, just like you can the pros and colleges. We're not there yet. Teams, again, are using, iPhones, are using Game Changer. It's hard enough to get, 2 schools to go along with the same thing, let alone 15 or 20, or, get our schools to use the same thing you'd be doing, so the Wingsport fans could check up on, Berwick and Hazelton, that kind of thing. We're a long way off from that, but boy, to just put that out there, if we could ever get to that point, we'd really have something.
Jim, with social media and online stuff, you've been pretty good for a while at enticing readers a little bit. For those not familiar with Game Face, the Citizens Voice puts out a Friday high school football preview section every week. And I can remember seeing as early as July, you guys starting to push that, to tease it, to do a countdown to opening day, things like that. What are some specific opportunities that you found that you can do with that, you know, and where do you get those ideas?
Game Face, we've tried to just market and make it the best it can be by pushing it and just doing everything we can think of. We have Twitter, Instagram, you know, I think this year we're going to do some Snapchat stuff. You know, anything that the kids are doing, you know, what the hot social media thing is for kids is what we want to do. And that seems to be a great way to encourage kids to follow us and you know, join the conversation with us. And we've really it's kind of evolved over the years. This is our 9th year for it. And at first nobody knew what it was, but now it's become, you know, everybody knows Game Face, and you hear people saying, you know, I want my, you know, I saw my kid's name in Game Face and things like that. And we've just been able to, it's kind of become its own, you know, sort of a monster, really, the way it kind of, you know, is taking over. But we've, you know, really used social media to push it. We did the countdown. We took jersey numbers and did a 99 to 0 for a countdown to do the launch of the season. And I think I saw like MLB Network or somebody was doing something like that. And I thought, you know, we can do that. We can localize that. We can get, you know, involved and do something like that at the local level. And you know, we do things with the covers. I have an idea for this year's cover to kind of do like a countdown type thing, but slightly a little different. And it just kind of gets people involved in the conversation, and that's what my goal is, just to get people talking about Game Face, talking about the Citizens Voice. And if, you know, these kids are following us and these fans are following us, you know, I hope that someday they buy our paper. You know, I hope that they see what we do on social media, and then they say, you know what, I'm actually going to go buy the paper now and see what they're doing in the print product.
Back to the print product. For years, Sunday would be the day for the big enterprise. Enterprise, the dirty word anymore, and the small newspapers often talk about not having the time, the resources to really put into that. Are you looking for opportunities at each one of your places to just not count on that Sunday piece anymore? And what do you replace it with?
Well, for us, it goes back to picking spots. We know in like February and March, that's high school postseason playoff time, so we're not going to spend the time to put together an enterprise package that's either going to not be as much of reader interest as, you know, high school district or state playoff games, or that would, you know, take a back seat to it. So what we have to do then is pick your spots, late March, April, in the summer. A lot of times in the summer we have a minor league team in cross-cutters, a Phillies affiliate, that we get pretty thorough with, and that's a really good time for our cross-cutters guy to just go have fun, and we do a lot of enterprising stuff for that team that way. It's picking, a lot of it's just picking your spots and not saying we have to get an enterprise package in this Sunday. Well, if this Sunday's got a lot going on, if it's the second Saturday in October with, you know, 5 college football games and busy local schedule, maybe we'll punt on a big enterprise piece for that section and look to maybe put something together on a weekend where there's less going on.
I think for us, one of my goals this year was to do more enterprise and sort of off the beaten path features. You know, we do a good job of featuring the high school athletes, but I'm trying to do some different things with maybe some of the local colleges or just, you know, your community athletes, your runners, things like that. So that's one of my goals this year, is to try and do more of that. And sort of like what Ben said, it's also sort of picking the time to do it. You know, in February when you have district basketball, district wrestling, and swimming going on, you're probably not going to want to devote, you know, a chunk of real estate to a big enterprise or a big feature, because that stuff is going to be driving your section that day. But now, you know, April, May can be a little slower. So you might want to, devote some space then to that type of stuff.
I also should mention, that, it doesn't necessarily need to be take a day and do this. This can be, a lot of times we do things in 20-minute chunks or 2-hour chunks. I mean, we're talking on the phone, that Monet Davis kind of became the local news gift that kept on giving over the winter, where she became a bigger than big star during the League World Series and talked about how she wanted her life to return to normal, and the last 7 months have frankly been anything but that. She keeps showing up on ESPN. She breaks Kevin Hart's ankles at an NBA Celebrity All-Star game, in which I felt like a pro wrestling stunt to me because Kevin Hart had a movie to sell. And, then some Bloomsburg University player shoots his mouth off on Twitter, and she handles it about as well as I think she could. Whether or not she was actually coached into that by adults is remain to be seen. But, that's led to an enterprise thing that we're working on. And, with us, it's like we don't say, well, this needs to be done by May 1st or it can't go at all. This is going to get done when the guy working on it has time to get it done. It's May 15th, great. If it's, June 1st, that's great. We don't set firm deadlines on a lot of our enterprise stuff because we know other things are going to get in the way. And yes, you want to make sure people are progressing and not getting stuck. But at the same time, we've got enough problems with daily deadlines and getting things out. I don't want our guys to feel like, oh, geez, I can get this enterprise thing done by next, by Thursday, or we're up it. No, we do kind of have to let these things breathe a little bit and let reporters set their own schedule and work the existing beats, especially if the enterprise thing they're working on doesn't really have anything to do with what's going on at that particular time.
Are we doing any questions from anyone?
I have a question. Sure. One of the things I is the diversity in terms of the sports that were covered. Football, of course, basketball is enormous in Indiana, but you go to that site and you'll see swimmers and volleyball and softball and all sorts of things, which I thought was clever in terms of there are a whole bunch of families out there in those communities in northern Indiana that want to see their kids' names in the paper and they don't play football. How much does that go into your thinking? How much, given the reality of resources, how much do you have left over for what in collegiate terms would be the non-revenue sports to make an impact? Is that something that you're thinking about?
Yeah, I think we've started to do that a little bit more with track and field. Mm-hmm. Track, there's a lot of kids participating in track and field. And so we try to devote a little bit more coverage to that, some features and things like that. So yeah, it's something we definitely think about. If you get a roster size of 60 kids,
right?
That's 60 readers where a golf team may have 10, so. And that's one thing that I'm becoming more aware of as an editor and trying to do more with those type of sports that have the big roster numbers.
Yeah, I've definitely found that the newspapers in northern Indiana, it's football and it's basketball. And then even in the spring, those sports, it's like the writers are like, oh, finally it's over. Let's just take a break for the spring sports. So I really made it a point of emphasis from the beginning to cover all the sports. Obviously, I want to be doing the football features. I want to be doing the basketball features because that's going to draw huge traffic. But as you mentioned, cross country, swimming, volleyball, wrestling is huge in Indiana. And then even like the non-IHSAA sanctioned sports. I did a piece on a motocross guy, local motocross guy that got a lot of love, on a skeet shooter who was on the national junior skeet shooting team. So those kind of alternative sports stories have really helped ascend the fan via ascend.com. And then also, Jim, to your point earlier about social media and really trying to engage the youngsters, whatever they're on, Snapchat, Vine, whatever, that's been a huge priority for the fan via ascend. Every time I go out to a game, I'm basically doing like a game recap as I'm at the game. Get to the game, do a Vine of the fans, of the players warming up, do some Instagram, do some touts. Audio Boo is another huge app that I use for post-game interviews. You can interview them and upload it, go straight to Twitter from there. So by the end of the game, if you're following along on Twitter at the Fan BSN, you basically seen the whole thing. And by the end of the game, I have, my Twitter notifications are blowing up because people in the stands, the students, are realizing, oh, this is being live tweeted. So even though I don't do game recaps per se, that's kind of how I fill that void. And then, as I mentioned, the Elkhart Truth is a partner with the website. They'll take, the interviews I've done or the vines and embed them along with their, the box score and the little blip that they do. So kind of that convergence of traditional media and new media.
It's interesting because it almost sounds like what you're doing is not really taking a risk on something, but stepping outside what has been the norm
Right.
for coverage for years. How comfortable, as editors in newspapers, are you doing that, Jim and Ben? I mean, is it easy to do? I mean, can you look for an opportunity and say, boy, here's a chance to engage with the readers, and maybe the impact is a little bit less in print. And I mean, I don't really know where that's going, but is that?
I've pretty much embraced all the social media, whatever it may be, and example is Tout. We started using that. Time Shamrock is using that, and we're pushing that. We did a series of videos for our Players of the Year, and I'm sometimes I'm not always crazy about newspapers doing video, but we had our boys basketball Player of the Year got like 11,000 views, and that was an amazing number in my opinion to see 11,000 people, 11,000 hits on a kid, like not even a 2-minute clip of this kid playing some basketball and talking about his season and his career, and that has kind of sold me now that we need to do even more of this, and I'm trying to encourage my staff to, when they go to a game, do the post-game interview with a Tout, do maybe in some game footage, to say I'm at this game and here's a little bit of the action, that type of thing.
Yeah, we have a situation at our paper in Scranton where it's the same way. We're owned by the same company, so we'll have a reporter out at a basketball game, and part of his responsibilities now is to hold up his iPad, take a few clips of the game, tweet them, tout them, and next thing you know, a game story that may have gotten so many eyes on it in the paper now is being shared across social media platforms. And as always too, you have your link to your story, so you're getting people to come back to it. But it's hard getting people to buy into that sometimes, getting your staff to say, okay, I'm going to do this because this is what we're doing nowadays in journalism, rather than saying, one more thing you need me to do, one more thing that you need me to do. How do you win that fight? How do you win that argument?
I should let them answer that. But,
Your boss is on the spot here. You can go at it.
no, a lot of it, I think, is I try to manage what I would call 80%. If we are a sport in newspapers, we're baseball. It's come back tomorrow, come back the next day, come back the next day. Except the difference is there's no off season. So it's important to always give them plenty of rope. And I just don't feel like if I give them a checklist of 6 things that they have to do at every game, as far as, video, Twitter, complete game story, no mistakes, make everything by deadline, something is going to give at some point. And frankly, it's on me to tie up the loose ends at the end of the night and make sure it's all there. And I just think it depends on you as the editor, and it depends on the reporter, what they can and can't do and can do on a certain night. And obviously, you got to remember our deadlines too here. A game that starts at 3 in the afternoon is a completely different set of circumstances than a game that starts at 8 o'clock at night. News that breaks at noon is a completely set of different circumstances than news that breaks at 8 o'clock at night. And I think you have to remember that too. And sit there and I think make the reporter feel like they got to check off all these boxes, this. You also have to remember, news happening late at night, the audience is probably in bed. They're less likely to consume this stuff overnight, and by the time they get up at 7, 8 in the morning, things have changed again. And I think that's important to remember too.
Small newspapers in the Pennsylvania market. Does Tim Tebow interest you guys today?
Probably because it might be a rain out for high school sports, so, so I'll probably get the, the back page or in our section. So, we're a tabloid, so we're.
Just to build off of what Ben was saying, I mean, when I'm out at games and doing the multimedia thing, and I got my camera, when I'm at games, I'm more of a photographer than anything. And I know that, for example, the Elkhart Truth, if they send a reporter out there to do a game recap, he's there focused on the writing aspect of it. So, like you were saying, Ben, I mean, it's basically impossible to expect a reporter to go out and do all this multimedia stuff and also say, oh, hey, we need your story on deadline, too. I mean, that's a kind of huge blessing with the FAMVSN is there's no deadlines, per se. Of course, I want to get a feature out, turn it as quickly as I can, but there's no print deadlines.
I did want to ask you, what went into your decision not to really worry about game recap? Because you are at the game. I mean, you could sit there and get the quotes and put together 600 words. Why did you decide not to do that even if you're already there?
Well, first of all, I felt like the newspapers were beating me on that anyway, in terms of just like flipping the story and whatnot. And also I really wanted to focus on that multimedia element. I mean, I kind of live by the mantra, it's a conversation, not a monologue, so instead of talking at them, talking with them, and that's on social media, that's at the games. And then just really the feature emphasis. I mean, I wanted to be able to get the quotes and the stories after the game as pertain to the feature. So usually what I'll do is I'll go out to a game on Wednesday night, do all that game kind of recap stuff on social media, and then Thursday morning release the feature on the big player or whatnot. So going forward, and especially if we can get more staff, that's something I definitely like to expand on. As a one-man band, I felt like I kind of had to pick and choose, like you were saying. Well, if I'm going to do game recaps, then how am I going to do the features and stuff? So just kind of picking and choosing based on the resources you have.
How important is it to be recognizable when you're out at an event for people there to know who you are, specifically just by seeing you?
Yeah, I mean, the website lives and dies off of that, honestly. Like I mentioned, maybe the first 6 months, 8 months, even year of this website, it was a lot of explaining who I am, what I was doing there. People had never heard of this website, obviously, so I had to build that brand and build that respect. And now when I go out to games, even if people don't know me directly, they know the FAMVSN. It's kind of become ingrained in the community, and that has enabled me to have easier access to stories. And kind of like Jim was saying earlier, just in talking to people out at games, that's when I get my best feature stories. I mean, I might go out to a game with an idea of a story I want to do, but in talking to people, I find a better story.
And Jim and Ben as well, how do you guys feel? Is it important for the readers, the viewers, to know who your writers are when they're out there? Because now more than ever, we're trying to engage them in conversations on blogs, on live chats, Twitter, Facebook, whatever. How important is it for them when they see your guy walk into an event, do you think?
It is and it isn't. I mean, some of our guys have been around there for a while. I've been there for a while. Another guy on our staff has been there as long as I have. And people know who they are when they get there. People who haven't been there as long, maybe not so much. It just depends. I think for the most part, it's like anything else. You show up and you let them know you're there. You talk to the people around the press box, the gates. Tell them you're at the Sun Gazette. That gets out. You walk in through the stands. Hey, I'm at the Sun Gazette, and they're going to tell somebody, hey, the Sun Gazette's here, and that word of mouth helps. If you're talking, especially 100 or 200 people at a local high school game or something like that. Some of us occasionally wear a Sun Gazette hat or a golf shirt or something like that. But other than that, it's just kind of being there, try to be a good person. And if you've got to do a confrontation or something like that, you limit the audience.
Well, the reason I'm asking that question is because I get more complaints by people who say, how come so-and-so wasn't at our game? How come he or she was at this game? Or they don't ever come to our games, or we never see them at our place. And it's not true because, as you know, you try and spread it around and cover everything. But now, in this age that we're in, Whereas in the past, people didn't know who the reporter was. Now they see them all the time. You know, how do you feel about that?
I think for us in the Wilkes-Barre market, I think it's very important for my guys to be out there, to be visible at games, to be active on Twitter, because that's potential readers that we could be giving to the competition. So I want to make sure. We just hired Stephen Pianovich, who's a Penn State grad. He just started our paper in February. And, I got him out to the district wrestling tournament. I wanted to get him out so people started to know who he was, get him active on Twitter, because, yeah, people know him outside of the area for covering Penn State football and stuff like that, but they don't know him in the Wilkes-Barre market. So for us, I think it's very important to get out there and get involved in the community. And almost, you're kind of like a community relationship. You want to be polite and do everything, customer service the right way, and be polite on the phone and all that kind of stuff. And that's why I encourage them, because I don't want to lose somebody to my competition. If it means being extremely nice to that person on the phone as to why their meeting listing wasn't in, or bending over backwards to get something in for them, I will do it. I'm at the point where I will not turn away any photo that's submitted to our paper. If it's a photo of like a karate kid or a basketball team, if they send the basketball photo in June and say, you know what, we didn't get around to sending it, I will run it, because we're delivering community news to people, and that's what they want to see. And that's how I feel we should be. We're there to provide a service.
Yeah, I kind of file that a little bit under the old age-old complaint of you only cover us when we lose. And really, all I have to say about that is our main people on each sport make it a point to see different teams throughout the year, and they are very upfront with the readers about that. And if there are good games on a given day that they're not at, then other people fill in the blanks there, and you're not going to hit everything. You're just not. And this is where, frankly, good enterprise comes in too, where if you haven't covered a team that's been doing really well for a couple of weeks, and hey, we've got 9 teams in our county, and we cover 22 of them, and a lot of them get more ink than others. You work those things into the feature. A lot of our beat guys, they do weekly feature columns and notebooks. You work those teams in that way, and they do that. And I don't even have to tell them to do it; they just do it because they know that's the right thing to do, and that limits a lot. It really does.
Getting back to where we started this session, how we talked about planning initially. How is it different now than 5, 10 years ago? How do you decide what's a priority?
I think for us, it's the events that we cover. High school football is a big deal with Game Face, so that's something that we start planning pretty much in January. The planning process begins a little bit and then evolves as we get closer and closer to the season.
January for high school football.
Yeah, because I don't want to bore you with this story, but we were told about Game Face 1 week before high school football started.
And how many years now?
This is the 9th year.
9th year.
And so we kind of scrambled to put together the first year. And I'd never, ever want to be in that situation again. I want to make sure that I'm organized and we kind of plan and we do things a little bit as we go each month.
Can you describe what exactly is Game Face?
I have some copies. I can.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a Friday high school football section that previews all the games.
Every week.
Yeah, every week. And this past year we did triathlon coverage. The Wilkes-Barre Triathlon is a big event. You guys with the Steamtown Marathon. You don't just want to cover the event. It's a big event, so you want to start planning and make sure you have everything covered for that event.
Good point you bring up with Steamtown, because one of the issues that I find now, Steamtown is going on 20 years. How do you reinvent that coverage every year? It's the same, you're writing the same stories. There's a group of runners, there's someone who had cancer, there's someone who's running for a dead relative. Game Face, you're in whatever year. How do you find the interesting angles? How do you make it fresh? I mean, that to me is a huge challenge.
It is, and I think the one thing we do is we come up with these cool features for the readers. This past year we did a series called Chalk Talk. It was 10 weeks, and we went over the summer and shot video of a coach diagramming his favorite play or a play that they like to run. And then we had the kids out on the field, and they ran the play, and the coach broke it down for us. And it was well received, I mean, and we just try to come up with some different things like that. One year we did an all-decade team. You know, I already have next year's project, you know, sort of processing that, trying to get that up.
It's only April.
I know, but next year's gonna be the 10th anniversary of Game Face, so we're gonna celebrate that. When we had the 5th anniversary, we celebrated that with a cover contest where people voted on their favorite cover. You know, which cover they like the best.
Is it designed?
It's all designed in-house.
That's one of the things we deal with Little League every year. Every year there's going to be a team from Japan. Every year there's going to be a team from Canada. Every year there's going to be a team from Mexico. And the way Little League has become gradually, there are a lot of very competitive pockets of Little League, and there are a lot of places where it just does not exist. So you might have a certain state, like, especially like the South, where a lot of kids will play other leagues like Dixie Youth League or Travel Ball, or they don't play Little League. You might, you know, go years without a certain state ever getting the League World Series. Meanwhile, like Louisiana, for example, they've sent the same towns had a team come probably 6 or 7 times since the field expanded in 2001 down Lake Charles. Why? Because Lake Charles plays Little League baseball. It doesn't mean they're better baseball players in Lake Charles than they are in the rest of the state. They just happen to play Little League baseball. They keep coming to the League World Series. So it's always a struggle for us is to look for those new stories too.
And Monty Davis comes.
Yeah, that she and Jackie Robinson last year really made our job easier. That was, of course, before the Jackie Robinson mess hit the fan. But yeah, we're always looking for a different culture to talk about. Like when Australia came 2 years ago, they were a new culture. For a while, you had new European teams come. It was a different culture to talk about. Contrast that, you know, the Canadian team that comes every year, which, you know, they're nice people, but they're within, you know, they're almost always within an hour of Vancouver, and they almost always go 1-2, and hi, happy to be here, and pack up the baseball bats for the hockey sticks, and that's the way it goes. We're just always looking for different cultures to talk about.
Ben, you sound a little jaded. That's from the back corner.
At least he has real Little League to cover.
They're friendly. The Canadians at the series are great people.
So he says any questions or any?
I'd like to ask you a question. What kind of interaction? You say it's all about interacting, it's all about the multimedia and using all the social media. What kind of interactions do you have, and how does it affect your business? Is it more of a sense of it affects the popularity and your growing business, or can you actually feel like the more retweets, the more interaction you get with your comments you get that you're generating business?
Yeah, I think there's a definite correlation between Twitter especially and the interaction on that, and then page views and traffic on the site. And then especially in the last 6 months or so, when it's really started to accelerate, like Jim was saying, people tweeting scores at us, photos, whatever. And I kind of take the same attitude as Jim. If you're going to tweet stuff at us and tweet scores, photos, even if it's a crap photo, I'll usually retweet it, because that's exactly what I want, is that community engagement. And then I found too, just kind of being like an annoying fly at games. Like, the players always know that I'm there because I'm sitting on the baseline when they're at timeouts. I'm doing the vine right in the huddle. So that's part of what I love about high school sports, is just that, kind of just unlimited access. And then in terms of back to Twitter, with the engagement, mentioning players and coaches on Twitter, I found is absolutely huge in growing the Twitter following, and also accelerating traffic to the site, accelerating the profile of the brand and the site. So that's really why I decided to use Twitter. I mean, I know sports journalism kind of lives on Twitter already, but I found it's especially potent for the high schoolers. Basically, all the athletes are on it, and so after games, when I'm tweeting photos, I can tweet it at them, and that's when I get the most kind of traffic, is with that original content, the stories, the photos, and stuff.
Questions, Jared?
Yeah, and this would be for all three of you, and Jim, you mentioned it, and Kyle, you just mentioned it too. One of the things that you said is you know, if something comes over the transom, you're gonna run it. You've got competitors, things like that. Now, this is easier for me to say, I'm a larger newspaper, but I want to hear what you guys think about this. There's also a gatekeeper part of our jobs, where it's like, you know what, this ain't rising, this ain't making it. How do you balance that? How do you say, you know, yeah, I want that 50 more followers on my Twitter feed, but this is garbage. I'm not going to put it out there. I know what I'll get if I put it there, but I'll pick this up at least temporarily. And just in a way, how do you guys, all of you, approach that? Because we all get stuff sent into our papers to run, and sometimes we do say, yeah, that's good. Let's get that in, or let's approach that story. How do you guys balance that?
Yeah, there's a certain standard for sure. I mean, it's always got to be positive, and especially for high school sports. You know, sometimes I'll get tweets that aren't so positive, and you got to kind of just let those slide. But I mean, really, it's just kind of a case-by-case basis. I found if it advances the product, if it's worthwhile, not just to the school or the game that I'm covering, but maybe to all my followers, I guess, then that's when I'll retweet or put it. I usually don't take stuff from Twitter and put it on the site. All the stuff on the site is original photography and whatnot, but it's more social media that I guess the gate is a little lower. So even if the photo's not top-notch, I'll retweet it, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I look for the same things that I look for if I'm going to put something in print. Is it biased? Is it inflammatory? Is it libelous or slanderous or anything like that? I'm not going to, you know, if you got two high school kids going back and forth on Twitter trash talking, we're not going to get in the middle of that and retweet it, and that happens a lot. But yeah, if it could be printed and if we had room to print it, then yeah, it's worth sharing, it's worth retweeting. But if it doesn't rise to that standard, then no, we're not going to do
No, that Twitter trash talk, that's a big thing. I mean, I've noticed too. And especially, I mean, even tweets that I'll send out and people replying to it, at some point, like I'll have to like block the conversations. You know, it's like these are kids, so you gotta keep the bar high.
What scares me now is the schools, these sports teams that have their own Twitter feeds. They're setting these up to tweet from their games, and you want to use them as a reliable source if they're at this game and retweet it. But you have to be careful. You know, you have to. You know, I'll look back if it's a new one. I'll go back and kind of check their history just to make sure they're not tweeting, you know, inappropriate things. You know, because they're not verified. You know.
It's also important to know, I think, who's doing them. I don't really.
Right.
Like Williamsport High School has one that is fine, but because we know who's doing it. But other people, is it a coach doing it? Is it a parent doing it? Is it somebody that, hey, here's a high school helmet from such and such. Let's make this an avatar, and then the next thing you know, if you know who's Twitter, if you know who runs the Twitter feed, you're probably okay. Especially if it's like anything else, somebody you can trust. Yeah.
We had a situation where one of the wrestling teams, the coach had set this up years ago, and he was involved in a criminal case, and next thing you know, he was tweeting some things about it, and on the school's feed, on this, you know, Coughlin wrestling feed, and needless to say, it was mentioned in his trial and all that kind of stuff. So,
And I'll also say on that, there's legit accounts from the ADs, from the actual schools, but then there's also like student section accounts, which can get, you know, real raunchy and just, so you got to be real careful what, especially you're retweeting when it comes to that, I think.
Do you guys, when you're on Twitter, like one thing I guess I'm cautious of is if I get students retweeting me, I tend not to follow the kids. Is that something that you guys are cautious about, like not building up your Twitter feed to have a bunch of kids in there so they have that direct access?
Yeah, I'll say that's a huge thing. If you look at our Twitter account, I only follow 8 people, and that's like the newspaper and some of the radio stations we're affiliated with. I don't want to give the perception of bias on the Twitter account, so that's why I don't follow anyone back. You know, they can follow me all they want on the Fan VSN, but I don't like to do that, especially when you start following athletes and stuff. It just gets murky in my opinion.
You can always just, do what some people do and set up an egg account, and it's, nobody has to know it's you. Don't retweet anything out of it, but it's just, if you want to follow somebody and not know that they're following you, that's another way of doing it.
We, my staff, we follow athletes, but they're designated work accounts. Like they specifically will say like, CV, Jim Reeser or something like that. It's very, explicit in how it's said. And we've gotten stories that way. We've learned like kids committed to schools because they'll tweet out that, hey, I just committed to such and such school. And next thing you know, a reporter says, hey, I just saw this on my feed. So really, it can be very beneficial to do that. But it has to be our official account. Like my personal account, I'm not following any current high school athletes.
Now, I'll also say on that, I have a Twitter list of Northern Indiana preps, so schools, athletes, coaches, and that I'm much more liberal with. I'll put anything on it, and I can go on that list and find breaking news, find college announcements without having to follow people on the FanBSN account.
Questions? You guys have anything you want to add before we wrap up here? Thoughts? I think we covered a good range of topics here. Okay. Well, that'll wrap up the first session on small newspapers. And we'll take a 10-minute break. I've got just about 10:45 here, so we'll start up again about